Welcome to Lead with Kindness, your essential podcast for disrupting the workplace with kindness and well-being. I'm Helen Rimmer, and I'm armed with 20 years of leadership experience and a passion for positive psychology. I'm here to offer practical tips and share inspiring stories to revolutionise leadership. Ready to challenge the norm? Let's dive in and transform our workplaces together. It's time to make a difference. Let's get started. So today, for the first episode, my guest is me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey and introduce you to why I am doing this podcast. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about what inspired me to focus on kindness and well-being. And that was very much about, it's probably always been in me. It's always been an innate way of being that I always didn't really understand when I heard about unkindness. Not that I didn't understand, but I didn't understand why it was there. And that it's always made sense to me that you would treat the people you work with, whatever level you are, as you would want to be treated yourself. And that well-being, it also was obvious to me that the well-being of the people I worked with was better when they were treated well. But probably a pivotal moment that led me to decide to pursue this as a full-time job. There were a few things along the way. There was COVID, having a baby in lockdown, all the juggling of all of life that we all had to do during that time with homeschooling, running a library service and being pregnant and then having a baby. A lot going on. But really, it was very much seeing the world of work in a different way after I did my PG cert in the psychology of kindness and well-being at work at the University of Sussex. And that really changed me because I went from just knowing what was right and wrong when it came to kindness and well-being, reflecting a lot on things like how you manage to balance the needs of a big team with the needs of the individual. Sometimes getting a bit frustrated with either side when it didn't seem totally the kindest thing. But once I started studying it, I understood the research, the evidence, the fact that there is scientific evidence about how we react physically to some of the things that are kind to us. Our vagus nerve will improve, our cortisol levels can go down, all sorts of different science things, but also that it's really hard. It doesn't matter how good your workplace is. If there's things that need changing, it can be really hard to change them when you're inside it, um, because it's challenging people. And that really became clear to me as well. So I suppose my pivotal moment was studying it and developing an expertise in it, realizing I was good at it as well. I got a distinction, loving it, finding a passion for it and talking about it. But the sort of build up to it was certainly around lockdown, but also in the end, I burnt out. Like this time last year, March the 8th last year, in 2023, I was signed off work because I was spent. And I will talk more about burnout. I've got some people I'm going to talk to on the podcast about burnout. But I never thought it would happen to me because I understood well-being. But in the end, life and things happened that meant that I burnt out and I fell apart. And I'm now a very different person to who I was then. I certainly wouldn't put up with some of the things that I'd had to put up with. And I think I burnt out because I was fighting against some very, very difficult things in the world, in a way. And maybe now I would still fight them, but I'd actually be steelier about it and know that actually in the end, you sometimes do have to stand up for yourself. But another thing I'm very interested in is protecting those change makers, the people who, if you're listening to this, you're likely to be, even if you don't identify as one, someone who's keen to make a change in the workplace. And from that, so my background is in academic libraries, so libraries within universities in the UK. I ran a library service. I've been deputy, associate director of a library service. I've run teams in them. And working in universities is a really interesting world because you've got a real mix of people. You've got often thousands of employees. Um, some places I've worked have been very much campus based, where you all are in the same place. That you've got a shared sort of ability to mix with each other because you all go to the same cafe and you all go to all these different places. But then also, I've worked on more than one place that was multi-site where my teams were spread across the university. Actually, that's really hard because you're never going to spend as much time with them as you would if they're all in one place. And it's really hard when you are overseeing a spread out team to really instill that culture of kindness and well-being. And I've worked in more than one place where that's the case. So I think my background gives me a lot of understanding of a real managing and leading teams that are very diverse. They have diverse skills. They have a real mix of age groups. There's people with all sorts of different pulls on their time, from people who are struggling to pay their rent, who might be at the start of their journey. They've just moved to London or Brighton in the UK, both expensive cities, and they're struggling to make ends meet. And how does that work? To people who are getting married or having children or both. And the journey through that part, the journey of people who have decided to take a different path, um, people with pets and those demands on their time, all the way through the journey of life, menopause, for women, men doing whatever goes on in their world around that. And also, when during all of that going on, often there's some caring responsibilities that come in for the older generation. And whilst also facing up to your own sort of aging, and the really celebrating all of those stages and making them not a problem for people. Um, so one thing I'm quite interested in um, is supporting people in returns to work, for example, and that might be after maternity leave, it might be after they've taken a sabbatical, it might be after a death, or it could be after a time out to study, all sorts of different places, but also long-term sick, or even just being off for more than a week sick. All of those things I'm really interested in supporting within the wellbeing journey, just because I've worked with so many different people. And as I say, universities are really interesting because you do have the sort of different pools on the different types of people that work within the whole organisation as well as the library. And you might have some teams that are revenue generating, some teams that are very much student facing, some teams that don't actually have much to do with the students, some teams who are involved in everything, and some who can keep themselves to themselves more. The issues around change within the universities are changing. They have a lot of external pressures, and that's all brings about a lot of learning. And I could talk about that all day, but I'm not just talking to people in higher education and libraries. So hopefully that gives you an idea that my background actually is very transferable to people in all different sorts of worlds of work. Um, and over the last 20 plus years of working, I think probably the biggest challenge was, without a doubt, um, COVID. And but I think that was so extreme. Actually, a different challenge I had was coming back from maternity leave the second time. And that was connected with COVID because I got pregnant at the start of COVID. It was the end of a fertility journey. And I had to juggle severe morning sickness, which I think I'd have probably been hospitalized if it hadn't been COVID. Juggle that alongside a very high risk pregnancy, all of the issues with that, then having a baby, and then more lockdowns and more homeschooling and all the pressures that came with that. And actually coming back to work and thinking that some of the things I'd taken for granted were no longer there, like being able to call on everybody for help and things. It wasn't quite as easy. But also, before COVID, I used to go into London 4 or 5 days a week. I'd get the train at 7:25 and I'd get the train home at 5, and it all worked really nicely. And I'd have lunch and coffee, and I found it really easy to connect with my team because I used to just walk around different sites, different libraries, connect with other people in the university because you saw them. And suddenly all of that went. And I think that was part of what made me think about the passion for work, because I am a true believer and always have been in flexible working, and hybrid working is brilliant and really gives a lot of opportunities. But I really had to understand all the challenges that came with that in running a service and navigating the needs of the individuals with the needs of the service. And sometimes it was really hard as well because there were all these other people with opinions about it, like within the world. So I think probably a big challenge that I got over um, was that navigating coming back after a maternity leave, having all the things that everybody has after a maternity leave, with adjusting to your new role as a mother, in that case, a mother of two. But there'd been so much change. I think that was where I realised that actually, if true well-being initiatives were in place, so that holistic view of well-being before the pandemic, we probably would have found it easier during and after to navigate things, because we need to ensure their psychological safety. We need to make sure people have wells of resilience, that they've got a positive foundation for their experience of work, of the workplace, that there's trust in our policies, and that our policies protect everybody, so they can't be weaponized, and they can't be misused or misinterpreted, and they should be kind, that our need to connect needs to be flexible in lots of different ways, and that we need to really be empathetic with the people around us. And also, it made me start to realise a lot about, within libraries, there's a lot of people who've done the same job for a long time and it suited them before COVID. But what we found was they'd started to realise that actually, and this was across the sector, actually, it wasn't so great to leave the house every day. And yeah, I know I'm on the customer service desk, but that's not really going to suit me, because that means I have to be in every day. So people were starting to make decisions about where and how they worked, which would separate to the job, so to speak. So they might do internal moves to be able to facilitate more flexibility. But equally, though there were jobs that needed to still be on site 5 days a week or so, how could we make sure people still understood that? But also, there are people out there who want to go into work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or whatever hours, and be on site. So how could we make things work? And I think we've been through a massive sea change. So definitely the biggest challenge, without a doubt, was COVID, and then returning from maternity leave afterwards. And that sort of motivated me to look into more qualifications, certificates, certifications, and so on. So the big one was obviously my postgraduate certificate in the psychology of kindness and wellbeing at work at the University of Sussex. I might mention it a few times. I'll put it in the show notes. But that transformed everything. It also put me in touch with some amazing people who live the same values I had. And it's that feeling of finding your tribe and finding those people that you can send a message to even now after a few months ago. Oh, I found this article, or I am really interested in this, and I think you wrote an essay on it. And we have a lovely network now. And I've got a similar network now from the people I studied business and personal coaching with, because we're on a similar journey building up our coaching businesses. And the bringing them together, I really felt cements my ability to be a really skilled kindness and well-being person. Um, so I also have a certificate in systemic team coaching. So that's looking at the entire system to see how that's affecting teams rather than just looking at individuals within a team or just the team. Um, and I will also, and I've also a Strengthscope Master, so I can sit down and explore with people using a Strengthscope test their strengths and how they can most thrive at work. Because if we play to our strengths, we will thrive. And I want to continue to grow and learn as much as I can. So I read books on positive psychology, which is the science that underpins kindness and well-being, and my coaching as well. I look for courses that I can stock up to do at a future date. Um, I'd love eventually to do a master's or a PhD in the psychology of kindness and well-being at work. And I really love doing all of that. And so unsurprisingly, self-development is one of my strengths. So I see a real value in it, and I see a real value in developing others as well. So my I from that, my ideal version of work is somewhere where self-development is quite an important part of people's lives, because I think it otherwise we can rust out and we can fall apart and we get de-skilled, which means, yeah, if we stay static, we get de-skilled, we'll be unhappy in our work. So well-being and kindness as the norm in an organization will have lots of different aspects. It will involve tackling some really difficult behaviours. It will be zero tolerance for bullying, for misogyny, for any of the nasty things that go in, day out in workplaces in the world, and certainly in this country. It will be about companies getting under the surface of what makes their organisation well. So it won't be about a fruit bowl or pizza on a Friday. Yeah, you can still do that. They're lovely little extras, but they're the cherry on the top of the cake. What you really need to do is sit down and work out what is impacting your team's well-being. And that could include things like going through your policies and making sure that you'd read them out to someone, that they sound okay, that they aren't written in a way that puts people off using them, but also that have the caveats that mean if someone abuses using them, because we want to have a zero tolerance to unkind behaviour, um, then the well-being will come from that there is a culture that is open, honest, and trustworthy. Because I always say you're only as good as the behaviour you tolerate, the worst behaviour you tolerate. So if you put up with people bullying, um, with misogyny, then that's your organisation's culture. There's nothing you can do about it until you deal with it. And putting kindness as the norm in there will mean that people will feel trusted, they'll feel empowered, they will feel that actually it's better to be kind and put other people first, as well as being kind to yourself. It will give you a solid foundation. And kind is not the same as nice, and that's really important. It's a much deeper actionable way of being. And it's really important for you to remember that actually the kind thing's often the hardest thing to do. And by creating this podcast, I'm hoping to um, contribute to the world of work by inviting lots of different people on to have conversations. I have so many great conversations, and I thought I'd love to have these recorded. I'm going to have people on who do mindfulness, people who deal with burnout, nutritionists, trauma-informed leadership coach, and all sorts of other people coming on, and we'll talk about how kindness can help the world of work. And some tools like mindfulness that can help you do that. So, some effective strategies to promote kindness and well-being in the workplace can start off quite small. It can be things like acknowledging people's successes. It can be gratitude jars or kind thank you notes. It can be also things like one of my tutors, Gillian Sandstrom, did a lot of work around talking to strangers. And actually, if you can sort of promote the idea of talking to strangers, it can really improve the well-being of the people in your workplace. And I really reflected on this because she's talked about conversations between barristers and their customers improving well-being. And actually, a lot of us work in organisations where there's some sort of customer-facing team. And if we can start to help them make the most of those weak ties and improve their well-being, then that's a really good thing. I think it's also investing in it, investing in the idea, actually living your values, because as I said before, you can say you're kind, but if you're not actually dealing with some of the difficult stuff, if you're not actually um, acting kindly, if you keep having people going off with stress, then that's a red flag. If you have a lot of people burning out, a red flag. Why is that? Bringing coaches to sit down with you and unpick, either systemic team coaches to unpick what's going on in the team, or coaches to work with you, and really try and just become a culture of those where these things are the norm, and where people, it's not a surprise if someone thanks someone, because that's normal. And some of this will involve some big conversations, but definitely the strategy, I think, is make a commitment to it, put some money in it, and head that way. Um, and then also, um, the biggest challenge, though, have found in promoting kindness and well-being in the workplace is, to be honest, it's the thing that's been used against me more than anything else. More people have said, well, she's not living her values, but I am. It's just that sometimes those values, particularly when I was working as a leader, involved challenging some difficult things. Yeah, I wasn't being nice in that I was saying, actually, you do have to do X, Y, and Z. We're paying you. Um, Actually, I was being kind to the wider system, with a wider service. And sure, there's probably times where I possibly didn't do things as well, but we're all human. But the biggest challenge is that you're almost a hostage to fortune when you say you're kind, and kindness is your reason for being, because very few people truly understand kindness and well-being. So in the future, I would say the biggest opportunities for making a difference in this area are around educating people on what kindness is, having conversations like this about why it's important to really get into what kindness is. And that's probably the greatest opportunity, is building myself a platform where I can educate people. And I know I'm making an impact because people email me a lot, or they post things to me and they say, look, I'm now thinking about it. I'm now really making a conscious decision, or after your training or after your coaching, it's really helped me see the kindness within and what it means, and it's helped with my leadership. So I'm hoping my greatest opportunity is talking about it. And then if you're a leader listening to this and you want to foster a culture of kindness and well-being in your organization, there's a few things that you can do. One is make a commitment to it, read as much as you can, read my blog, listen to your my podcast, read other books. I've got one coming out soon. And really get to understand what kindness and well-being is. Now, the difficult thing is if you're in a larger organization and the system around you, some of the departments that might have some power, aren't actually kind and don't really understand well-being, then you may find that your values don't align anymore with that organization. So it might be worth being aware that really getting into this could lead to you needing to change jobs, or it could lead to you joining me in my world of kindness and wellbeing coaching. But it also could be that within an organization, you find your tribe and there'll be enough of you to really foster that culture. But you will need external support in, so to speak, reading, all sorts of things, but also potentially consultancy, coaching, and so on to come in and really like get across to people the culture of kindness. It's deeply uncomfortable for people who may have succeeded in a system to start to realize that system isn't actually kind, or is actually part of the problem. I mean, we've seen this all the time in conversations about people returning to office. It's often people who have succeeded in a system that made them go into the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or even longer hours, who don't understand that that's not how it is anymore. But if our organisations want to thrive and they want to survive, then they're going to have to change as well, because we know research shows that Gen Z, who are entering the workplace, will not put up with a lot of the things that the people heading towards retirement, not all of them, a lot of them are very open-minded, but some of them are holding on to. So the people we see, the Alan Sugars of this world, who are sitting there saying, I want everyone in the office whilst on Zoom himself, actually we're going to have a real generational issue there. And I'm really hoping we can explore that a bit more through this podcast. Um, then, but I have also seen when kindness and well-being practices can really make a significant impact. For example, one of the things I advise on often is introducing flexible working. And almost, well, I think always, the feedback is thank you, because now I have been able to some days drop my child at school, or now we all have the right to work the hours as we need them to. Sure, we might have to do certain rotas, but it's okay. I don't mind, because another day I can come in a bit later, or I have control over my hours. My first place of work, a library again, we had complete autonomy over our hours as long as we did our hours over the course of the week. And we filled in timesheets and things to keep track of it. And we were able to then stock it up. And at the end of the week, end of the month, or end of the year, you might go, oh, I've got 4 days, I can take them off. And it was all done in a trusting way, where we would talk to each other and we would say, oh, I need to do this afternoon. Is that okay? Not is that okay so much as, are you around to cover? And it all worked. So I've seen it work. And I really, really appreciated the fact that in that particular situation and everywhere else where I've introduced it, or supported people introduce it. The biggest thing that happens is it takes away the them and us, where people may have flexible working requests um, that are formalised, and they have to get up and walk out of the office when nobody else is allowed to, or but actually it takes a lot of admin if you let it happen. Of course, there will be people who try and push it to the boundaries, but you deal with that individual. You don't punish everybody because one person might try and abuse the system, or yeah, end up doing less hours and things. So it's definitely one of the best things for influencing um, kindness and well-being. And personally, I would say my definition of success has been impacted a lot by thinking about where we will end up, and that actually um, it's become a bit of a joke with me and my son. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes progress. And that's what we will be doing. I don't think I can define success. What I would say is, for KPIs and things, I would want to see, after some well-being changes, a reduction in sickness, but also going down in a bit further, a reduction in stress-related sickness, particularly as well. Um, and understanding, though, when it comes to sickness things, that all you need is one bout of norovirus and your sickness will go through the roof. So having some context on all of that. But sitting there looking at sickness rates, looking at the productivity of people, it sounds such a capitalist thing to say, but actually, it's proved that when we are well, we just get more done. Now, that also takes me back to the flexible working. Actually, my dream is that we're not measuring people on the hours they're paid for, we're measuring them on the outputs of the work they do. But that probably is a little way off, and we don't want to go back to yeah, people having to do piecework. But there certainly is something on trusting people that one week they might work less hours and the next week they might work more because of what they're doing. So my definition of success, I think, is that people finally admit that the workplace isn't well, and that they really start to dig under the surface of why that is. Um, and for me, my focus on kindness and well-being has truly influenced me, because it has allowed me to acknowledge things like my burnout, but it's also made me value things, for example, my yoga on a Thursday night, or um, being kind. And going back to that, talking to strangers, ever since Gillian spoke about it, I do it a lot more. And I honestly say, conversations with strangers is one of my favourite things. You don't know what you're going to find out. You don't know where it's going to take you. Sometimes you speak to them and you think, oh, I might have to move. But actually, most of the time, people are just really interesting. And yeah, I love that. And I love the feeling I get. I also make a really conscious effort to do kind things, like if I'm right, I might need to edit this later because my cat just walked across the keyboard and started playing music. So I've got no idea what I was just saying. But hopefully that will add to the reality of what's going on. Um, yeah, and I was talking about my own life and well-being, and yeah, my cat is part of my life and well-being, and yeah, sometimes puts music on for me. Anyway, I'm very kind to her. Um, so going on, I would like to wrap up by saying that I hope that those of you that will join me on this journey and not be put off by cats being DJ, um, will go away from these podcasts with tools, with things to take into their worlds of work, and join me in this disruptive world of kindness, because in the end, kindness is about disrupting the status quo and changing. If you want to get involved, I have obviously my social media channels. All of this I put in the um, show notes. I have a Facebook group called Kind Families, Happy Homes. For people interested in kindness within the family, but I also have a librarian lifelines one for people who are librarians interested in well-being. Get in touch with me if you're interested in working with me as a coach or a consultant or a trainer. I really want to get out there in as many different workplaces as I can and start making a change. And also, you can make changes in your own workplaces quite simply by taking a deep breath and saying thank you to people, by making sure your communication is kind. You could have a acknowledgements board or a gratitude jar. It will depend on your workplace a little bit, but also don't turn a blind eye if something bad's happening. Go to your human resources, go to your managers or your directors, start challenging the unkind things that are helping. Because I know for sure that I have experienced things that if people have been brave enough before me to challenge, we wouldn't have ended up in the situations we ended up. And I've written about legacy toxicity on my blog. So if you're interested, go and look that one up, because that's part of what we need to dismantle, is the legacy of what has come before us. And we need to make sure we don't pass that legacy on to the people coming up behind us. So looking ahead, I'm really excited about some of the things I've got coming up. So I've got a book coming out. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes, called The Kind Librarian, but it's actually a toolkit for anybody to make their workplaces kinder. And I'm really excited about that coming out. I'm also excited about some speaking events I'm doing, this podcast, my blog, and also all the people that have already asked me to come and talk to their workplaces. But I really just want to get out there and really, really, really be able to lead this sort of, well, not even lead, be at the forefront with some other great people, changing the world of work. And at the end of it, I think my main thing is just please think about kindness in the whole, not as just a easy thing to do. Thank you for joining us on Lead with Kindness. I hope today's episode has inspired you and equipped you with practical insights to bring more kindness and well-being into your leadership journey. Remember, the transformation towards a kinder workplace starts with us, and every small step counts. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with fellow leaders, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more people committed to positive change. I'm Helen Rimmer, and it's been a pleasure to be part of your leadership journey today. Until next time, keep leading with kindness and fostering well-being in all that you do. Goodbye and take care.